Our next guest says President Biden's threat to withhold certain weapons from Israel if it invades Rafah is misguided foreign policy decision. Perhaps President Biden's most egregious. Joining us to talk about that as well. It's the Fed and the state of the GOP. I think he saw Speaker Johnson's interview as well. Former Republican U.S. Senator Pat Toomey. Senator,
Morning, Joe.
It's good to see you. It's been a while. I will read one thing that occurred to me when I was reading the Journal today. Israeli officials and analysts said Biden's warning appeared to be a political message that in the short term really wouldn't affect Israel's ability to fight the war. And that would make sense to me. You know what I mean? Just sort of just lip service to a part of his constituency, but really not going to follow through on it. Is that possible, or is it really dangerous that this becomes policy?
Well, I think both can be true at once, right? In the short term, I do believe that the IDF has the military capability, the resources, the materials, the weapon systems they need to do what they need to do in Rafah. However, it is very damaging for the president to indicate to the world that the United States is not willing to stand by Israel in this exercise, really, to preserve their very existence. This, in my mind, is a continuation of the squandering of deterrence. What message does it send to Hamas when President Biden indicates that his support is contingent on Israel not finishing this job? There are 4 battalions of Hamas terrorists in Rafah. Of course, they want to survive, regroup, retake control of Gaza so that they can live to launch more attacks on Israel. Of course, Israel has to prevent that. But when Hamas hears that, well, maybe the U.S. won't stand by Israel, it obviously emboldens them to hold out more, to demand more in any kind of ceasefire. And the message it sends around the world is that the United States is not necessarily a reliable ally. So I think this is very, very dangerous in sort of the bigger picture in the medium term.
And as Speaker Johnson pointed out, it wasn't easy for him to get Israel aid passed, and that's what the administration and Democrats and a lot of Republicans wanted. He did it, and then now this. Right. It's kind of ironic. But let me.
It's worse than ironic, yeah.
Something I didn't realize, Senator, back in 1981, and I guess I was asleep at the switch, but President Reagan delayed delivery of F-16 warplanes to Israel because he didn't like what was happening with the way they were bombing Beirut. So this would not be totally unprecedented.
Joe, in all fairness, I have to say I don't remember the circumstances well enough to know whether that's a really valid parallel, exactly what were all the terms. And maybe that was a mistake then. I just don't know. But I'm quite sure. And this is a part of a pattern. Let's remember, with Ukraine, President Biden has systematically denied the Ukrainians the weapon systems they need to actually prevail. He was dragged kicking and screaming to provide any of the systems that he has reluctantly provided, including the Patriot missile defense system, Abrams tanks, short-range ATACMS. He still doesn't allow the Ukrainians to have long-range ATACMS. He's very intimidated, obviously, by Putin. He's been desperately trying to get back into a deal with Iran, and he's just made a series of really bad decisions that I'm afraid really undermine our deterrence.
I've heard former Secretary of State Pompeo make that point, that's where Ukraine got a lot of the weapons in the last administration, some of the more potent weapons. But just given the impression of the last 6 months or so, the reticence to help Ukraine has not been coming from the Biden administration and Democrats.
Oh, absolutely.
It's been coming from Republicans.
It's both, Joe. Right? The President Biden has certainly asked for aid of certain forms, and he still wants to deny Ukrainians the weapons that they actually need. And then Republicans have embarrassed themselves terribly, I think, in the House, eventually passing legislation that really should have been passed 6 months ago. I don't like Johnson for that, certainly not entirely. I mean, he's been dealing with a very, very difficult set of cards that have been dealt. I wish he had gotten to this point sooner, but at least he finally did. But the Republican conference is an awfully hard conference to lead these days.
Senator, just looking at Mike Johnson and what he may owe Hakeem Jeffries at this point, I mean, he may need to be saved again from the Republican conference if Marjorie Taylor Greene or someone else brings something up down the road, especially if there's a deal that has to be cut in the fall. What is the back and forth? Is there more likelihood of bipartisanship coming out of this, or what's the give and take?
I think it's hard to say. I think the House actually has a relatively short list of items to do here by the end of the year. They want to get an FAA reauthorization done. They have to do NDAA, which is the National Defense Authorization, and they have to fund the government. Beyond that, they're not going to be very ambitious. I think that the Republican conference as a whole has to acknowledge that the political culture has changed and rules need to change accordingly. For instance, it's completely unsustainable for the Speaker of the House not to control the Rules Committee. The Rules Committee determines whether or not a bill goes on the floor and under what terms that bill goes on the floor, such as whether or not amendments are allowed and which amendments. The Rules Committee has always been controlled by the Speaker, regardless of party, because that's the only way you can actually control the floor. Well, right now, Mike Johnson doesn't control the Rules Committee. I think the Republican conference, a large majority of Republican House members, are coming to realize that they're in a situation where they can't govern, given the sort of performative politics of some of their members who are not interested in legislative accomplishments. And so they're going to have to change the rules so that the leadership actually has control. A majority of the conference should be able to fire the Speaker, but a single member being able to gum up the works as badly as they have, this is not sustainable.
Senator, you have called former President Trump badly flawed. You can't vote for him. Can't support him. I know you won't endorse him. Do you have a preference for who prevails in this election that's coming up? Would you rather have President Trump win, or would you rather have President Biden win?
Joe, look, it's a terrible question because it's so hard.
But it's a binary choice. I'm just wondering.
I can't vote for President Biden.
You see the regulatory environment. You see what the agents, NLRB, totally. FTC.
No question.
Gains. You can't pick one. You can't. Neither one. You don't know.
I am probably going to write in a candidate.
But
look,
that candidate's not going to be president. So, but you in a binary choice, you can't find one scintilla to either vote for President Biden or to vote for President Trump. You can't distinguish between those two choices as an American.
I think I'm going to choose not to make that choice, Joe. I said what President Trump did after the election, in an ongoing concerted effort to overturn the results that he knew had occurred so that he could stay in power. That is completely beyond the pale and completely unacceptable. Joe Biden has been a terrible president, has made us less secure, has damaged our economic prospects, and he'll do more of that if he gets a second term.
You think Dave McCormick can win, Senator?
I like Dave McCormick's chances. He's a terrific candidate. He's running a very smart, well-financed, disciplined campaign. Pennsylvania is a very, very narrowly divided state. I like Dave McCormick's chances a lot.
Really?
And I think Republicans are very likely to take control of the Senate. And it's really a question of how big is the margin. And that gives me a lot of comfort.
Where else do they pick up seats? They're going to pick up one in Montana?
I think Ohio and Montana are very good opportunities. States that Donald Trump's going to carry, in Montana by a very large margin, in Ohio by a substantial margin.
What about the House?
The House, I did think until recently, I thought Democrats had the advantage in the House. I'm not so sure anymore. Some of the redistricting went better than we expected that it would. The generic ballot right now is about even. When the generic ballot is even, Republicans take the majority. Donald Trump is probably the front runner right now as against Joe Biden. If he is winning at the top of the ticket, then Republicans probably take the House also.